Kia ora tātou. Look, welcome back everybody to our council meeting for the 28th of June 2023. Right, we'll come back to where we left off on the agenda, which was number 11. That's around our civic and cultural precinct, master plan steering group, the terms of reference. So on page 161 of your papers, David Murphy is just going to get to the table and we'll look to discuss that. Thank you, David.
Kia ora koutou. Hopefully the memo is relatively self-explanatory. Happy to take it as read and answer any questions.
Thank you, David. There are no questions. We'll move straight into moving these. So the council will adopt the terms of reference for the Civic Cultural Precinct Master Plan Steering Group. Attachment 1, 2, council approve Mayor's recommendation for membership of the Civic and Cultural Precinct Master Plan Steering Group. The Mayor, Councillors Barrett, Bowen, Fitzgerald and Harpiter. Could I have a mover for that? Thank you, the Deputy Mayor. A seconder. Thank you, Councillor Dennison. Are there any comments? There being none, we will vote. And that is passed, 13 votes for with 1 abstention. Thank you. Right, we'll move through to number 12, which is a paper from our finance team, and Scott Manser, our finance manager, will present that. It's on page 165. It's around council's bad debt write-offs. Scott.
Afternoon all. Largely administrative, this paper. It's over the Chief Executive's delegations. It needs to come to council for approval. I'm going to take the paper as read and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Scott. I'll start. There is a few questions from councillors, but before I pass it on, could I just get you to give us an understanding of how old some of these are? So the Fortress one is the Ticket Direct, is that right?
Correct.
And it is for which facility?
Relates to the two events in 2020, the Superstock Teens Champs and the Under-18 Men's Softball Champs.
Right. And the bad debt for the Jets is not the current people, is it? It's the former people, is that right?
Correct, yep. So that was previously noted to council at a paper on the 15th of September. There's no operational or responsibility for the former organisation, and it's not the current one that's operating today.
Okay, and that's a 2020 debt, is it, or 2021?
2021, May and June 2021.
Okay. And the final one, Pioneer City West Limited, is for a developer, is that right? And that's, how old is that?
That was raised in June 2014, but there were a couple of conditions that had to be met prior to this one being able to be written off.
Right, and what are those conditions? Is it?
In the paper under the Pioneer City West heading, there was 2 recommendations, either 1A or 1B being met, and I understand 1B has been met, which was Pioneer City West agrees not to progress private plan change B for a period of 18 months and to work collaboratively with council on a council-led district plan change at Kakatangiata.
Right. Was there a debt that council owed the developer?
I'm unclear on that. Getting a shake of the head from our Chief Planning Officer, so no.
Right, that's fine. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Scott. Can you just tell us what systems we have in place to kind of minimise bad debt effects as an organisation?
So I have a credit controller in my team who actively progresses these once they become overdue. We do regular monitoring. Once they reach a certain period, we use a debt collection agency, and they also make attempts to recover the debt and get it back to us. So all of these have gone through those processes that we have as standard practice.
Thanks, and I guess in terms of seeing things that, I guess how can you kind of pick up, is there ways to pick up early on that things might be heading in the wrong direction, and do we have systems in place?
Yes, we do have a list of usual suspects and usual types of invoices that are unlikely to be paid. Claims is a common one. Usually they're not agreed costs that they want to bear and things like that, so they'll do everything to avoid paying us. And unfortunately, that's just the nature of those kinds of invoices.
Great, thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Cameron, for giving us a bit of context in the paper. I think my line of questioning is, sorry, Scott, sorry. Thanks for giving us a bit of context in the paper. I think my line of questioning is similar to Councillor Barrett's question, but you've already answered it, so my other question will probably be,
We're on a time limit, Councillor.
Has this happened before? Like,
In terms of debts needing to be written off?
I mean, yeah, being written off and that sort of thing.
Yes, absolutely. So the normal process is if they're under $8,000, they'll go through the same processes that I just outlined in my previous answer, and then the delegation resides with the Chief Executive to authorise those write-offs as well. It's a process we do annually at the end of the financial year to clear those debts off the balance sheet, ready for the start of the new financial year. Just so happens that we've done that this year in terms of the system migration that's happening this weekend as well, so it clears those balances entirely.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Mr. Mayor, just left the queue, sorry. Cheers.
Okay. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just one question around the Fortress debt. The comment in the paper says the insurance claim is not affected by the bad debt being written off. Just trying to understand what's the timing of that insurance claim being decided?
I'm not certain of that, but I believe he's out of the country and is unable to be chased any further than that.
No, I'm not meaning reclaiming the debt. What I'm talking about is the insurance claim.
Yep, that's the reason why the insurance claim can't be progressed.
So if the reason for writing off this is so that it can be clear for the new financial year, how is that impacted if the insurance claim does come through and that writing off not all of it, you know, say some of this was funded through the insurance claim, how would that work with the books if it had now been written off?
That would just come through as revenue in the year that we get the insurance claim back. So we've already expensed this debt through our doubtful debts provisions in previous years. All this one is doing is changing it on the balance sheet. Okay. If we get in the future an insurance revenue from this, it will come through as revenue in that year that it happens.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Just a question about the Jets basketball team, you know. Thanks very much for the reports. But it reads like they shut down one entity to get out of paying the council debt of $20,000 to start up again and invite us to become part of their sponsorship program. Is there any other way that we could still seek repayment of that current debt, considering that they're still operating, even under a separate entity?
No, so I understand the entire structure behind the organisation was entirely different. Those in the current structure have no ties operationally and or legally to the previous organisation. I understand we weren't the only ones who didn't get paid when that organisation ran out of money and closed.
Councillor, they're different people. Yeah. Okay. Not a nice thing to do this, but we have to resolve this. So we've got 3 recommendations there around resolving the, no more questions, thank you, Scott, around bad debt write-offs. Unfortunately, we haven't had to do this for a while, so that is good. That council write off the bad debt of $162,000, excluding GST, owed by Fortress Information Systems Limited. 2, council write off the bad debt of $20,000, excluding GST, owned by the Palmerston North Jets Basketball Incorporated. And number 3, that the council write off the bad debt of $58,000, excluding GST, owed by Pioneer City West Limited. I'm happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Councillors, it's never good doing this stuff, but I suppose when you put it into the bigger pot or scheme of what council turns over and the money that flows through the organisation, bearing in mind one of these is 9 years old and the others are 3 and 2 years old, and one of them, you know, that person can't come back to New Zealand. So that is the largest one that's there. So it is somewhat academic in nature, so if I could please ask for your support, and we will vote. And it has passed, 15 votes for, none against. Thank you. Right, we move through to number 13 on our order paper, and it's page 169. Ask Bryce Hosking, our property manager, to come forward. And this is around earthquake-prone buildings and a priority order for our council-owned facilities. Bryce, thank you.
Kia ora, councillors. So in a pleasing, I guess, turn of events, I think previously I'd been talking about 26 facilities. We've actually managed to confirm that now as only being 21 facilities in our entire portfolio as being earthquake prone, which is positive. So we've now done a detailed assessment of every single building that we own in our portfolio, to determine exactly now what is earthquake prone under the legislation and what is not. The purpose of this paper was to try and I guess bring a bit of rigour and assessment to how we might prioritise those 21 buildings to be strengthened. They all have varying timelines of when they need to be done by. The one with the shortest timeline is the Regent Theatre, which has about 7 years to be strengthened from today, right through to some at the bottom of the list that have 15 years. So I guess there's been a couple of assumptions that have had to be made through this process as well, in particular around in one of the attachments, it talks about some of the cost estimates and things to that nature. We've made some assumptions around, I guess, the most practicable option in some cases, looking at what would potentially need to be done. I guess my big caveat to that is until you actually do the detailed design of it and really get into the detailed assessment of a building, it is only really at that stage that I'd be able to confirm costs more so than I guess some lumps as we've indicated in this report. No two strengthening schemes are the same, so it's quite difficult in some cases. And when we talk about a facility, it's also important to note that if any one element of a facility is earthquake prone, then it means the whole facility is. So in some cases that could be a relatively simplistic way to remedy it. We fix literally the parapet or perhaps the external wall. We might be able to do some work to that, but the balance of the building is fine, for instance. In other cases, there's actually a multitude of issues throughout the entire structure that would need to be investigated and attended to. And some of those cost assumptions are based on some of that knowledge. So the two biggest ones are essentially Te Manawa and the Central Library. And that was based on some work we did, well, probably best part of four or so years ago now, looking at those sort of various elements at a high level and determining exactly what would need to be done. I guess the only other thing I would say is how will this translate through into a program of work in the LTP? Depending on the order that you approve, so whether it be the one sit in front of you or you do have the ability to move a couple of those buildings around if you wanted to prioritise a building over another. But we would then reflect that through the LTP and beyond, I guess, because we do have some buildings that are 15 years. We would be looking to always design a building and probably look to strengthen one, so there'll be a sort of different work streams going on, so we can get a good roll, because in some of these, especially some of the more complex situations, there's probably realistically a 2-year lead-in through that sort of design consenting sort of stage before you would get anywhere near actually doing any construction. So there is going to be a continued role, I guess, through the next 10 years to be dealing with that. There was also a consideration around how we could try and spread some of that financial load over the 10-year period. Some of that will have to be worked through as part of the LTP. Some of it, unfortunately, will be a little bit unavoidable. But as I said, depending on what the actual strengthening scheme is in the end, or how we want to deal with these, will dictate some of that costing. So happy to take any questions you may have.
Great, thanks, Bryce. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Bryce. Just a couple of questions from me. So you said the DSAs removed around 5 from the list. Where are they sitting now? So are they at sort of just 38% or something where they're on the barrier, or are they sitting more at 40 or 50% where we can be quite comfortable they won't come back onto our list?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Most of them were sort of the high 30s, early 40s, I believe. We'd sort of done a high-level assessment of there's generally some indicators that might suggest a building could be earthquake-prone, and some of that comes down to things like age, parapets, construction, and things like that. So we'd sort of early flagged those as potentials, but we were able to rule those out.
So you're comfortable we don't need to look at those additional 5 buildings in making this determination?
Correct.
Okay. Regarding the wastewater treatment plant admin block and wastewater treatment plant block and digesters, they ranked 7 and 8 in the initial order, then they scored low in the additional considerations. They're low cost, they could end up in a 3 waters entity. Why have we prioritised these as 2 of the top buildings for our strengthening when the metrics show we shouldn't?
Sure.
Don't really need to.
That work's actually underway at the moment, so it's actually
already
it'll be due for completion early next financial year. So well before the 3 waters proposal was anywhere near in the in suggestion. The logic, this did get talked about at the last LTP for those councillors who were around, and why would we look to prioritise some of those? Really, it came down to critical services. So if we did have a significant event, having a wastewater treatment plant that was functioning was a pretty critical facility, and so actually prioritising those and getting them underway even through the last 3 years was seen as a priority to make sure we didn't get caught short.
Fair enough. So as a point of procedure, then why would we put them through this criteria process and then just say, well, they're already happening anyway? Wouldn't we just have a category for already underway seismic programs and not worry about doing all of this?
The interest of completeness.
How wonderful. In terms of the Square Edge, what engagement have you had with stakeholders? Because I see you've got Square Edge front building as number 7 on our list, and then the Square Edge rear building as number 12. Have you engaged with them to hear what their preference would be if we just got it all done in one block, or whether they would like us to do it in 2 stages?
We have had significant engagement with the trust. They're well aware that their building is earthquake prone. There's notices on it being such. They will want to work with us around that. I guess one consideration around that building is there is about 50 odd tenants in there, which I guess are all sub-tenants of ours, so we don't actually have a direct relationship with them. When that building is having to be strengthened, it will be unable to be occupied, and there will be a consideration for that one around how would that decant and where would those entities go during that process, and I don't have an answer for you on that. But what we would try and do is tie that into their current lease in terms of timing, so at least we can align some things from that perspective.
So what I'm trying to identify here is today, do we need to link those 2 together as a single item so we don't have to kick 50 tenants out twice, or is their preference that we do it in 2 separate stages? Because I don't...
The main building, or the front building, has the majority of those tenants. There's only a handful in the rear building. The structure of the rear building is such that, well, I'll be careful what I'll say, but I'd say there's a high likelihood of it being unable to be strengthened as it is, and possibly demolition would be a realistic option for that. We could choose to then rebuild that back, and that would be a future decision to be made in some form or another, but that element does not hold the heritage items that the front building does either. So they are to answer your question in a more succinct way, they're very different, and I would suggest we should treat them separately, because I think your decision making will be different.
Appreciate that clarification. Thank you. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Barn.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Bryce, for the report. The multi-criteria assessment, can you just talk me through the process for that? Who did that? Has it been peer-reviewed? What's the rigour around it?
Yep. So it was done internally by officers, and it was peer-reviewed. It went through probably a good 6 or 7 different sets of eyes as it made its way through. And there was a bit of a challenge session as well around some of the scores and looking to rigor it through there. So it did go through a fair bit of a process. We did also informally engage with Rangatane on one of the criteria as well to get their thoughts through that process.
I suppose what gave me pause for thought was around the score around occupancy level, where I'm seeing that the Regent scored a 4, which is 200 to 300 people, where the description talks about maximum legal occupancy and regular peak occupancy, which for the Regent will be a lot higher than 200 to 300 people.
Yeah, trying to take I guess an average event working with them, and their average event sort of popped out and around that level in terms of occupancy. You are correct. It does have a higher capacity, so there could be argument that you could increase that score again. Whether it would materially affect the order of the strengthening, I suspect it wouldn't.
No, I don't think it would, but probably the same criteria consideration would be for the library, the Regent and Te Manawa. They'd all be similar considerations, yeah?
Yeah, they would. And they've all scored pretty highly there. We could upgrade them again, but as I said, would it affect the score? Not sure.
Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. The 2 big ones that you mentioned, the library and Te Manawa, with obviously the 2 biggest price tags at 50 million each, or the estimated project cost. Those 2, over the years, there have been consideration or discussion about whether those need to be 2 standalone buildings going forward, or whether that could be, if it was to be a rebuild as opposed to strengthening buildings, whether that could be one building. At what point in the process would be helpful for council to give direction about that?
So there will be a program being put forward as part of the Civic and Cultural Precinct work that will explore that piece of work. As I said, in order to put this in front of you, we've made an assumption. I guess the assumption we made was a partial or complete rebuild of those 2 facilities in their current locations is where those sort of figures were put on. As through that civic cultural work, councils may decide that actually they would like to combine them together, and obviously that will create its own sort of workflow from there around what that would look like and what that price tag may then be.
So thank you for that. So did you just say that those project cost estimates was a partial rebuild? Or
that was the assumption we made. So back in 2018, we looked at both those facilities and considered, I guess, all of the different elements of them that made them earthquake prone. There is, I need to caveat that saying there is a bit more work to be done there around what is a library of the future, what does it need to be delivering on, and things like that. That still need to be worked through. Yep. But back in 2018, we considered that. For the library, I believe that the figures at that time, it sort of said it would be about 50 odd million for a partial rebuild, essentially retaining the heritage facades, or you were looking at about 45 million to like-for-like strengthen it. And that's sort of some of the logic we used.
So, sorry, just to be clear, so you're suggesting that that decision would be made as a part of the Civic and Cultural Precinct process?
I think that process would determine whether you wanted to retain them in their current positions, bring them both together and consider something there. In terms of if the decision was made to keep them separate and keep them there as per the assumptions here, what those buildings look like, what the costs were, how they would function, that would be a separate decision that I would bring to you in due course.
Okay, so just one final question around that. So the fact that one is given a proposed order of 2 and one is 4, which might imply that the timing of those would be different. Is that problematic in terms of the options that might be able to be considered for? I mean, I'm presuming we're obviously not going to be making a decision about that today, but would the prioritisation being different limit our options in being able to consider a one building for both of those?
No, it wouldn't limit your decision. The LTP would end up, I guess, making some assumptions. So we might have one being done over years 3 and 4, and one might be in years 6 and 7, for instance. But then early in the LTP, as part of that civic cultural work, if the decision was to bring them together, then I guess at least you'd have a budget provision in the LTP, and it could be altered accordingly.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Bryce. Just a very quick question. Just in terms of each of the buildings, in terms of seismic strengthening, they will actually have a different due date, would they?
Yes, they do. They do. The only priority building under the legislation is the Regent Theatre, and as I said, that has a 7-year clock. The clock starts once they are confirmed as being earthquake prone. So you essentially, once you get notified from the regulator or council in that respect that your building could be earthquake prone, and then you think of me as the building owner, is probably the easiest way to look at it. I have 1 year to respond to that and confirm either way of whether it is indeed earthquake prone or get a report to say otherwise. And then it is from that point in time when it's confirmed that 7 or 15-year clock starts. So the very first one we did was the Central Library building, and that was in 2018. So that 15-year clock started in 2019, I believe it was. So there's, as you can see, that one's there has already been several years that have passed. For instance, the Lido that was identified in there, that was only identified earlier this year, so that 15-year clock starts from this year.
Okay, so the timeline, according to the seismic strengthening assessment, has that been included to the multi-criteria analysis or not?
We've made an assumption that all of the earthquake-prone buildings will be remedied within their required timelines. We have, however, taken into consideration the priority building factor, i.e. the Regent, and that has brought that up, helped to bring that up higher in the list.
Okay, so, yeah.
So through the LTP, when I bring you a draft program of what that would look like, that will detail out in more detail of exactly when these buildings would be done over their sequential periods. So in the next 10 years, some of them will be strengthened, some of them will probably fall out the back end and be done in years 12, 13, 15, for instance.
Okay. Do you have any comments in terms of the pressure around both those timelines and our capacity to be able to do that within the period?
We're not the only earthquake-prone building owner, I guess, in the region or in fact in the country. So there is some limited resources in that space. There's also quite a variability in terms of skill sets, specialities and things in that space. Probably the best comment I could give would be to be organised and have the quicker we can be looking to cement in quite a regimented program will mean that we can start to engage with people as early as possible and look to get things done as they are required.
Okay, and just last question, thanks, Mr Mayor, is so what is the sanction if we don't meet, bring these buildings up to spec, up to standard?
By the letter of the law, so as per the legislation, essentially they would need to be vacated and would no longer be able to be occupied if they were not remedied. Remedied being the word, so it could be anything from demolition through to like-for-like strengthening, but essentially that's what the legislation says. I guess I could speculate on what would happen in 15 years' time if you had 100 buildings in the city that nobody did any work on, but I don't think that would be useful for this forum.
Thank you, Bryce. Mr Mayor.
Pretty sobering. Bryce, I'll just add to that. You've identified 21 of our buildings. Roughly, is that just the tip of the iceberg for the rest of the city? Another 60-odd buildings?
I don't have those numbers, but perhaps Lee would probably have a much
I just need a number.
accurate number.
There's currently 117. There's currently 117 registered earthquake-prone buildings that have notices, and about that many more that are on extension of time right now and likely to be issued notice.
So it could be 250 buildings. Wow. Okay, that'll flavour my comments, thank you. Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question for Bryce. Thanks for the report. I did find the definition of key terms very useful when I was reading this. Just to wrap my head around the key criteria assessment rating, on page 193, the scoring for the crematorium as a priority building is 1, and yet it's on the side where, on the criticality side of things, it's 5, it's rated as 5, and the occupancy level is also 5. So I wanted to understand, are crematoriums not considered as priority buildings under the legislation, because the number 1 rating would suggest that?
No, so the legislation has quite a defined thing around what a priority building is, and a lot of that is around being on priority routes, whether it has things that could fall onto those routes and block key access roads and the likes. The crematorium being where it is in an isolated cemetery, so essentially it doesn't meet that criteria. However, it is a critical building, and hence council has prioritised it to be completed at the moment.
Cool. Thank you.
Councillor Harper online.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Bryce, for the report. Have we looked at any opportunities where we could potentially sell some of these properties and, look at leasing them or leasing them out?
Not at this stage.
Rather than doing all the work ourselves?
No, not at this stage. The assumption in front of us here would be that we would retain those buildings and we would look to strengthen them ourselves.
Okay. Looking at other councils, have they done any of that kind of work where they have sold some of their buildings and leased them back after the work had been done, or any of that kind of proposition?
I don't know if I could answer that with any great detail. I know councils around the country, and talking to some of my colleagues in Wellington, for instance, where they have a number of earthquake-prone buildings, councils are considering their options in this space, and there are options, and I guess different ways to be looking at that, to be getting it done. I don't know if I could answer in any kind of specific sense around where we're looking to do that.
Okay. Thank you, Bryce. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Bryce. A couple questions. 266 Rangatiki Street, what's the function of that building?
That's got MDF finance in it at the moment. It actually got, council acquired that bit of land actually referring back to an earlier conversation earlier in the day about Featherston Street, and there was a strip outside outside Mitre 10, and it sort of continues round. And council also purchased that many years ago, a couple of buildings on Rangatiki Street there to, with the idea of a future opportunity to be able to do a left turn bay essentially around there. So we consider it a strategically bought building, and basically we've just commercially leased it until such a time that council chose what they wanted to do with it.
Right, thank you. You talked, I think in your response to Councillor Hancock, around your working assumption is that things will get done within the statutory timeframes. What's your thinking in terms of what would be needed there in terms of sort of contingency within that, so that we didn't unfortunately end on the wrong side of the timeline?
I think that needs to come through the work program, really. As soon as we can, I guess the content of this paper and agreeing on an order of things, the next task from my team's point of view is to put a project plan in place to be making sure we're able to remedy each of those buildings within that time frame.
But is the thinking to work to the full time frame?
For each of the buildings, we'll make sure as part of that plan, and when they're planned in terms of timing, the consideration will be to how long they have to be strengthened by, and making sure that each of them are done within their legislatively set time.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you for letting me jump back in, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of questions that have been spurred. So, firstly, the $50 million figure for the library and the $50 million for Te Manawa, I was under the impression that was done at the point of our last annual budget, so 2 years ago. But are you telling me that was done in 2018, 5 years ago?
It was done leading into, we identified it as potentially being earthquake prone in 2019, and we kicked off some work then. It is currently sitting in the existing LTP in about year 7 and 8, I think it is, under that same financial assumption.
So that figure's probably, what, 4 years old now?
It is, and I did put some consideration into whether I should speculate on whether I should try and update that figure, but as I said, until we actually get into the design of that building and understand what it actually looks like, it's near on impossible for me to determine what that might actually cost.
Or could you speculate if you think that figure's going to go up or down as we go into that process?
No, because essentially a lot of that will be driven by what is a library, what kind of services are we trying to drive from there, what does the building need to facilitate, and once you work out those, the building can then be designed to deliver on that.
Okay. In terms of Lido Indoor Pool, just a question I should have asked earlier, is that the physical pool itself, or is that the building surrounding the pool?
Yeah, it's the building, so this is only referring to buildings. In that case, it's actually the exterior wall on Park Road to the 25-metre pool that needs to be dealt with. So that's a good example of we can remedy that wall quite simply. The balance of the building was not earthquake prone, but then the whole facility will no longer be considered earthquake prone.
Excellent. And just on 266 Rangatiki Street, so I mean there's about 4 other shops down there. You've got an Indian shop, Alexander Barber's, and a few others. Do we own that whole block of buildings or just the MTF finance component?
No, so we own we own the MTF building and the little one that used to be a B&Z next to it.
Okay.
We do not own the one on the corner, which is where the barber shop and the Indian restaurant is. We then do own, if you move around onto Featherston Street, just Zilch, and then obviously a strip of land alongside the road all the way down to Nada Street.
So in terms of 266, how long ago did we purchase that? Have we got an item to actually look at what we do with that building if it was purchased for a strategic purpose 20 years ago and we've never done it? Or?
Yeah, it was purchased in 2010, I believe.
Okay.
Quite a while ago, in anticipation as an opportunity came up, as I said, for that left turn bay that may get done at some point. But given we do not own the property on the corner, obviously that could not actually go ahead at this standpoint.
Is there anything, I mean, this is the first time I've heard that we even owned that building. Maybe we have an offline conversation about what we do with that going forward. So anyway, thank you, Bryce.
Right, councillors, just wary of time, and it's in your hands whether we come back tomorrow. Deputy Mayor.
Kia ora, Mr Mayor. Kia ora tātou. Thank you, Bryce. You mentioned earlier that you thought that, that you said we'd done a detailed assessment. Who did the assessment? Was it an organisation like Becca or?
Majority of these assessments have been done by Becca, so that was a good guess. But some of them have been done by other organisations such as WSP. But the majority were actually done by Becca.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Bryce. Thank you for pulling that together. So we've got the resolution there that Council approve the proposed strengthening order of council-owned earthquake-prone buildings as set out in Appendix 6 of this memorandum. Obviously, things will come back to us in more detail as we go through everything individually and assess things on their own business cases. I'm happy to move that. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Councillors, I'll just speak very quickly. This opens a real major issue for the Lower North Island. Give you a context. There's 250 buildings. We're only talking about 21 of them in the central city. There just isn't the contractor bandwidth to finish all of those buildings. Very few have been done from the private sector. So we're going to see a Christchurch-like happening here, where buildings are either to be left to rot or demolished if we go with the legislation as it appears at the moment. Just signalling that I'm joining a regional group of mayors that are going to talk to government around looking at lengthening or changing the legislation in some way. Fielding is on a really tight timeline. They have 75 earthquake-prone buildings within their central town. They're through 20 of them. Even if they wanted to fix the other 55, they simply don't have the bandwidth. So they are now preparing for what that may look like, and it's ugly. It gets worse when you talk about Pahiatua, Dannevirke, Masterton, Martin, and further afield. It's just really ugly. The CE and myself were in Wellington. You haven't heard anything yet. The billions that they need to spend there is unprecedented. So we are on a collision course of some major numbers. And if it's stuck to the legislation, the only people that will do any business here are the demolition guys. So we just need to be really, have that in the back of our mind. Thank the officers for the report. Thanks, Bryce. I don't know if we've got the bandwidth to get through all this either in the time frame, let alone whether we own things or lease them or who wants to buy them. That's the other thing. You know, in our glam sector of museums, art and libraries, we have $100 million worth of liabilities that we know of. And I'm all for owning those and fixing those, but it's significant, let alone all the others. So real questions, more questions than answers, to be really honest. And the time frame and the contractor bandwidth is not there for this country. And I think our central government politicians do need to understand that. Yes, there's an element of risk with that, but is the risk of decimating this part of the country, is that greater? I question. So I'm quite happy to prove this, but with an eye to what is coming down at us like a freight train. So I'll open it up. There's no other commentary. We will vote. Thank you. That's passed, 14 votes for and none against. I'll just get through one more before we break. So number 14. So I'll ask page 197. I'm not sure who's presenting that. Mr. Murphy is. Thank you, David. So this is around future development strategy. David, 197 of your papers.
Kia ora koutou. obviously, we'll take the paper as read. Happy to answer any questions. Just before we do that, I just want to acknowledge Michael Duandam, Acting City Planning Manager. Michael's unfortunately home sick today. This would have been his last appearance in the chamber, and unfortunately Michael finishes up with us next week, so I just want to acknowledge publicly the work that Michael's done over a long period of time for the council. It's mixed emotions that he's leaving us. He is heading down to lead the planning team in Wellington, so we're really pleased about that, but obviously sad to see him go, and it's good to see our staff go on to opportunities such as that. So yeah, if you see Michael about, he's around for another week or so, wish him all the best, and we will miss him, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, David. And this was something that David and the planning team identified was coming at us, so it's good, and I think it's great that we've struck a good arrangement with our regional colleagues to do some joint work. Bearing in mind that the city has the urban expertise and our partners have the environmental or in this case the waters expertise. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. David, just wanted to ask, given that it's proposed to kind of roll it in with the LTP consultation processes, but it is a joint exercise, whether there's thinking around the potential for joint hearings to ensure that everyone's kind of hearing the same thing, or is it more of kind of two things and then trying to mash it together at the end?
Yeah, it's a good question, and we're actually going to do a little bit more work investigating that. What we wanted to do was we knew that we need to start working with the regional council to prepare the FDS, and the joint steering group is a good way to start that work. There's pros and cons to having a joint, like a joint governance arrangement that formally consults on the FDS and then hears submissions and makes a decision. There's also, the option that both councils prepare the FDS and then it goes out for consultation on both LTPs. Or also there's an option where we both prepare the FDS and then, one council, potentially the city, then takes the lead and runs the consultation, but the Horizons LTP points to that. So we've got a little bit of work to do on that, and we'll report back on what we think the best option is alongside the preparation of the FDS and the LTP. But for the time being, because it's a relatively unique situation, it's the first time we've had to develop an FDS, and the regional council's dragged into it because we're a tier 2 city. So we've spoken to MFE about it. They were adamant that there needed to be joint or both. We're going to just, it's new legislation or new policy in the NPS, and it's my reading of the policy is that it provides some flexibility about the way in which it can be delivered, but MFE had a slightly different view. So, yeah. So the short answer is we're still working on what we think the best technique is that's useful for both councils and the community to engage appropriately.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, no further questions. We'll go back to our recommendations. So this is around the future development strategy, joint steering group between Horizons Region and the city, and the council resolves that Palmerston City Council, Horizons Regional Council establish a joint steering group to guide the prep of the future development strategy, that council adopt the terms of reference for the future development strategy, our joint steering group attachment 1, and number 3, that the following 3 elected members are appointed as representatives of the Palmerston City Council to the future development strategy steering group, the Mayor, Councillor Lorna Johnson and Councillor Leonie Harbour. So I'm quite happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Just want to acknowledge the councillors that have put their names forward for this group, and my rationale around selecting our 2 colleagues there was not only both chairs, but they have RMA accreditation as well. So it was either, in fact, just about everybody that had an accreditation put their name forward, so I just want to acknowledge that too. All right, if there are no further commentary, we will vote, please. That's 13 for, 1 abstention. Thank you. All right, we're going to break, councillors, and we'll be back in the chamber at 10 to 4. Have a cup of coffee and stretch the legs. Thank you. everybody. Right, we're through to number 15. This is around review of remuneration for directors of the CEDA, Central Economic Development Agency. We have that on page 203. And I'll ask David and Sarah to speak to that, please.
Kia ora koutou. This follows a desktop review of remuneration rates for directors of CCOs and for, in particular, the CEDA directors. Manawatu District Council had a look at this report last week, and on the 15th of June, and received it as the recommendation requires. Just to note, councillors, that if you do want to do further changes to the remuneration structure, officers will have to come back to you with a process for doing such things. Happy to take questions.
So if I could just add, that process would need to involve a conversation with our shareholding partner, Manawatu. So as Sarah said, they received this report last week, but didn't pass any resolutions to do anything other than receive it.
Thank you, David. Thanks, Sarah. So, in essence, officer advice is the report as is, and we look to accept it without tinkering or changing. Okay. Councillor Naylor.
Yeah, thank you. I just note the recommendation is to receive the report, but then in next steps it says that CEDA's Board of Directors will be informed of the decision of the council. So if we're just receiving the report, what is communicated in terms of if there isn't, how do we communicate what the decision of council is if we're simply receiving a report?
Well, I think if you've received it, the report says in the body of the report that we consider this to be a review of the remuneration as required by the policy. So if you simply receive it, then the review's been complete and nothing changes, and that would be communicated to council. If you wanted to do something further with the information you've received, then you need to pass a resolution to that effect. This is the first time we've completed a review of this CEDA remuneration. So. And as I said earlier, if there was a willingness to look more closely at the remuneration, the first port of call would be to engage with our shareholding partner to obtain their views. And as I said, they received the information a couple of weeks ago and didn't pass any additional resolution to do anything further.
And so was the last specific direction around the remuneration pool that one that's outlined in 2.3 in October of 2015, when it was a pool of 155,000.
Correct, yeah.
And just in that chart that outlines a few of the other entities, a comparison against other cities. There are some. Well, some of them are quite big cities, but have you got any comparison against the likes of Hamilton or Tauranga? I mean, there is Canterbury, there's Taranaki there, and
Southland's there.
Wanganui. Southland is there, I can't see.
There's also Taranaki and Nelson, Whanganui, and Table 2.
Okay. Okay, and just final question, sorry, Mr. Mayor. The commitment of the 180,000 pool, does that just go to, what's the term, when does that go till?
So the policy says that CEDA are required to pay their directors from within the grant that we provide to them. So that $180,000 comes from the grant that we provide to CEDA. But they need to appoint and remunerate their directors in accordance with the policy and the decisions the council make, or the councils, sorry.
So what's the time frame of that commitment of that grant to CEDA? Is that to the end of this year or or is it to the end of next year?
Yeah, so CEDA has funding confirmed up until the end of year 3 of this LTP. So beyond that, it would be subject to any decisions made in the LTP. We did talk last week about the need to provide some certainty to CEDA going forward, in the lines of a letter from the Chief Executive that we would look to continue to support CEDA, anticipated at the amount that's in the current LTP, but that would obviously be subject to, as always, would be subject to decisions made on the LTP.
Okay, so the commitment is to the end of June next year for a further year. Okay, and so the only option in the paper that's really outlined in terms of looking to have savings is reducing the number of directors. If that was to be considered, would that be as of a year away?
The easiest way to do that would be to, when a director's position is up for renewal, you can then choose not to seek another director, and so therefore reduce the number of directors on the board.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Harper, online.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Sarah and David. Just a question around CPI increases, and since this wasn't reviewed since 2015, so it's been it's been a long time ago since it was reviewed, these rates. What is the policy around reviewing things in terms of CPI?
There's nothing in the policy around CPI adjustments.
Okay. Right. We have a recommendation there to Council that the Council receive the report titled Review of Remuneration for Directors of the Central Economic Development Agency, CEDA, dated the 28th of June 2023. I'm happy to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Councillors, I think it's a good overview of where we sit in the marketplace, and I think we are well placed. Bearing in mind there is quite a difference on how different cities and regions treat their economic development. I know Tauranga is not there because they have a different model called Priority 1. Hamilton's not there. They have a different model, which I think is in conjunction with the airport and Tainui. So, look, there is different courses for different horses. So, I'm happy to move that. We have had a chat with CEDA and understanding what their preferences were, and it'd be fair to say that they feel they are comfortable where they are at the moment, and we're not going against our other shareholder either, and we've been aligned with them. So we have Councillor Harper. Comment.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I'll just be really quick. I do think that we have had these rates for quite a long time, since 2015, and I do think that we need to keep valuing these people in these roles, and in terms of the rates, and by keeping them the same rates as we had as 2015, it's kind of like we're taking them for granted. So I do think that at some stage we do need to review these rates, and so that we're actually showing them that we are valuing what they are doing for the service they are giving back to us. So I do think that at some stage we do need to we need to put at least a CPI on these rates going forward. That I know not today, but I think that we need to build that into this at some stage. That would be going forward. I'd like to advocate for that going forward. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I certainly value the work that the board, the directors do at CEDA. However, looking at this report, it does strike me that we are paying very much in the upper range as compared to other cities perhaps of a similar size. We're up there with Canterbury, which is a lot bigger. I personally, I'm happy to receive the report, but personally, when it was moved from 5 directors to 6 directors, and that increased the pool to 180. I guess the decision going forward from the middle of next year, I'm not sure when that would be made, but I presume that would be a part of the LTP process. But I'm just indicating that my appetite wouldn't be to be increasing it at all. I mean, I would have been more interested in looking at whether whether there would be a reduction of the number of directors, so that the pool was perhaps more in line with other cities similar size. So happy to receive the report, but not necessarily that comfortable with what this indicates.
All right, councillors, just very quickly write a reply. Look, just remember we have a shareholder in this, and we just need to be mindful of that. Absolutely can have our own views, but I think we should be aligned as we possibly can be with our shareholder. Is it right-sized? I think it is, and I think the proof is in some of the stats there. Southland's an example that is perhaps a little bit smaller than us, but the numbers aren't too far away from what we're doing. And then the median average is close to what we're doing as well, if a little bit under on the director remuneration. And do we change this going forward? I think we've got to be talking to our shareholder. We perhaps have a talk to the board to get an understanding of the workload. Has that changed? Is it less? Is it more? Is it about the same? And what are our aspirations? Because this agency does a whole lot of work for us, and we need to make sure that we're getting the best value out of that board and the organisation too. So thanks to the officers for putting this together. I think it gives us an idea that we are right-sized, and that we seek as much as we can out of the organisation in the next part of the contract, and I too would like to think that we are going to support them going forward as well. All right, we'll vote. Thank you. It's passed. 12 votes for, none against. Thank you. Right. We've got a big long one here, but I think we can move through this pretty quickly, because we actually have supported a number of these already. And we have the remits for Local Government New Zealand 2023 annual general meeting in Christchurch coming up in a few weeks, prepared by Sarah and our governance team. I don't think you need to speak to it. Councillors, it's on page 211, and we might just step through them if that's okay. And the first one is number 1, an allocation of, does council support an allocation of risk and liability in the building sector from Queenstown Lakes District Council, and we've already supported that via a membership of the metro sector, and that was a unanimous vote of the metro sector. So that will be support. Number 2 is around the rates rebate, and those reps that were, I think Councillor Mickelard was with me, and the CE at Zone 3 in New Plymouth, and this is around rates rebate, raising the income threshold. We've spoken about that as a council before, so I don't think it will be unknown territory to you all. So that's supporting Hawhawhenua District Council in the support on rates rebate, so that will be support as well. And Zone 3 has already done that, and again, I believe it was a unanimous vote. Number 4 is around road transport maintenance funding, and we have already supported this, and it's around lobbying political partners to increase the Crown funding of our roading maintenance budgets, and that was supported by us previously, so that's again a support. So that's number 3. Number 4 was around local election accessibility. We don't have a position on this one. This is from Whangarei District Council, that LGNZ ensure local government elections are fully accessible by advocating to central government to make local government candidates eligible for the Election Access Fund. And I'm just going to think how we do this. We might just move the first 3 and get those out of the way and move down the list if everyone's fine with that. So I'm happy to move the first 3, seconded by the Deputy Mayor, and that just confirms those 3. If there's no further comments, there being none, we will just vote on those first 3. Just tidies that up. And that is passed 12 votes for, none against. Right, number 4 is around this local election accessibility. This is around making sure that accessibility is available to disabled people if they want to stand as a candidate. My personal opinion is we probably should support this. It goes with all our values and ethos. So, Councillor Naylor.
Happy to support, move or second.
Okay. All right, well, we'll put in there at this stage, we will, I'll move it, seconded by you, Councillor Naylor. We might just go for this one now. So is there any other comments to this? There being none, we'll vote on number 4. Has passed 12 votes for, none against. Next one, number 5, is again from up north, and this is the Northern Regional Council. Practice that they do more in the regional space is that LGNZ explores and promotes options that enable councils to make greater use of co-chair arrangements for standing committees, joint committees and subcommittees. I'd say that we're probably going to support this because we do it ourselves with our partners, Rangitane, around the Rangitane and Manawatu Committee. So I'm quite happy to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. We'll just see if we can look at number 6 and we'll try and move these as a group. Parking infringement, number 6 is around parking infringement penalties. Again from Whangarei, that LGNZ advocate to central government to enable councils to determine penalties for parking infringements. The background to this is around the Land Transport Act sets out the parking infringements and towage fees. They obviously have had some issues around what they're allowed to clearway fees and towing fees and allowed to claim back. So it's around increasing infringement fees also for the misuse of disability parking spaces. I'd say it's probably something that we would support, but I welcome others' comments. I'm happy to move it if there's a seconder. Thank you, the Deputy Mayor. So that's another one that we will, unless we can vote on this if anybody is not in support. We'll go to number 7, where I'm on a roll. And this is around rural and regional public transport. Again, from another regional council, this time Waikato. And it's around acknowledging that the government stated for support for a major uplift in all urban bus networks nationwide under the New Zealand's first emission reduction plan, but also calls on the government and opposition parties to commit to increasing investment in public transport for rural and regional communities to support access to essential services and amenities. vibrant rural communities, and just transition to a lower emission transport system. It's not really our space, but I don't think we should. It's something we probably should support for the likes of Fielding, Levin, who often complain that they have no public transport. So again, I'm happy to move that. Second by the Deputy Mayor. We're on a roll. We'll go to number 8. And this is around establishing resolution service. And this is from Hutt City and the young elected members. And this is around investigating the creation of an LGNZ independent national process to handle complaints or concerns and accountability in local government, working with the Local Government Commission to implement findings from its September 21 report, Local Government's Code of Conducts. Is there any interest in this? Not seeing a lot of interest. Okay, we'll give that one a miss. But what we'll do is we'll vote from 5 to 7 now. Okay, that's passed, 12 votes for and none against. So with our number 8, we can either not support or abstain. Going through to number...
Mr Mayor, when you said was there any interest earlier, were you looking for someone to move it?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'll move it.
Okay, yep, happy to do that. Is there a seconder? Okay. Councillor Hancock? I misread the room, sorry.
I thought you were looking for comment.
No. Okay, well, look, we can vote on this one now. Okay, all right. Before we do that, number 9, which is around earthquake-prone buildings, we've already supported that through zone. Number 10 is the KiwiSaver contributions for elected members. We actually have supported that in name. And number 11 is in audit New Zealand fees and conducting a scope and requirement from the government on that. We've already supported that in name as well. So, councillors, I think that I'm quite happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor, to capture 9, 10 and 11, but we'll capture, we'll just go back to 8 and do 8. We'll do 8. Do you wish to speak to this, councillor, or are you fine? Okay, we'll just vote on 8, thank you. And it's passed, 12 votes for and none against. Thank you. We'll now go to 9 to 11. We'll take those as a group. We've already supported it, so we will vote, please. And that's passed, 12 votes for, none against. Thank you. All right, moving along well. Number 17 is a paper from our International Relations Manager, Gabrielle Lagola. Gabrielle, welcome. And it's around an invitation for myself to attend the Eco Forum Global Conference in Guiyang, China. I'll allow you to speak to it.
Councillors, thank you for having me. I'll just take this report as read, but before I am happy to answer any questions, just like to acknowledge Kate Herridge, the International Relations and Education Advisor, for her work on this report. Kate is unfortunately away on leave today, so now I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay. Being no questions, I've declared an interest, so Deputy Mayor.
Kia ora, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to move this motion, this is Rona.
Okay. As a seconder, thank you, Councillor Hancock. All right, it's in your hands, Deputy Mayor. Wish to comment?
Tēnā koe, Mr Mayor, o te rā, tēnā tātou. Thank you, Gabriel. I think we've seen the benefits of when people go overseas and participate in more global centred initiatives. I think it's very generous that our sister city has said that they will pay all costs. And I also think that it's wonderful that our mayor can go over and hopefully broker further opportunities like he does when he does go overseas for our city, for staff and other citizens within Palmerston North. So yes, I'm very happy to support this. Kia ora.
Okay. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Right, we will vote. There's no further comments. It's passed 11 votes for, 1 abstention. Thank you. Right, we move through to the scheduling of additional council meeting number 18. It's page 253. I'll take that as being read. It's a paper from Sarah and our governance team. This is around council scheduling a extra meeting in August on the 16th to consider roading tenders and to allow for a more timely progress in our works program. So I'm, for one, wanting to do this, which others, thank you. So I'll move this, seconded by the Deputy Mayor, but just giving everybody some notice, and I apologise that it's, even by our standards, somewhat late, but it is definitely needed. Okay, we will vote. It is passed 12 votes for, none against. All right, we'll move through to the council work schedule, and that is on page 255, and quite a number of things there. But I'll ask the CE if he's got any commentary on it.
Through Mr Mayor, just pointing out that items number 1 and 10 just been informed that they'll be going to the Finance and Strategy Committee.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Just checking just to make sure that we get an inclusion of those matters referred to in the last item will be updated into the work schedule.
Around heritage?
No, sorry, the scheduling of additional council meeting and the consideration of the roading matters.
I'm sure they will be. They just had to wait for official approval. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, so look, it's around our work schedule. Council resolving to receive the work schedule dated 28th of June 2023. I look to move it. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. There being no comment, any other matters, we will vote. And it's passed 12 votes for and none against. Right, we move through to our committee recommendations. Strategy and Finance Committee of the 7th of June 2023. I'll look to the Deputy Chair, Councillor Naylor, to move these. This is page 259 of our papers. I'm sorry, the Chair's not here, so I'm just defaulting to the Deputy.
Yep, I just want to move the recommendations of the 28th of June Strategy and Finance Committee.
It's the 7th of June. Okay, is there a seconder? I'm happy to second it. Are there any matters arising from that? There being none, we'll look to vote, please. And it's passed 12 votes for, none against. The next one in our papers, page 261 and 62, which is around our Economic Growth Committee recommendations from the 21st of June 23. I've spoken to the chair and the deputy chair, and they're quite happy if I move these. So, Council resolves to adopt the clauses 20 to 23 around the airport, clause 22-23 around the strategic networks, and clause 23 around the Central City Transformation Streets for People project. And I'm quite happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Could we separate number 1 or 2023?
Yep, I was trying to avoid that, but we can. That's fine. So we'll do the first one first. So
Could we also?
Could we separate all of them?
Yeah.
Sorry?
Could we separate all three of them?
Okay. All right, we can do that. So we'll do them separately. Just give the staff a bit of time to separate them. So, councillors, that's from our meeting of the 21st of June this year. Right, we will look to vote on number 1, please. And that has passed 9 votes for, 2 against and 1 abstention. Right, we'll look to do number 2, please. And that has passed 10 votes for, 1 against, 1 abstention. And then finally, number 3. Vote, please. That has passed 7 votes for, 4 against and 1 abstention. Thank you. Okay, we will now look to move into part 2. And for the reasons as seen on your agenda papers, which is shown on the screen, and it is around reasons set out in the ordinary minutes, for the reasons set out in the ordinary minutes of the 14th of June meeting, held in public, around the JC appointments for privacy reasons, and candidate for President, Vice President for LGNZ is to prevent improper gain or advantage. So I look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. If there are no matters arising, I will look to vote, please. Two more, please. Can you just check you voted? Okay, we're through. 12 for, none against. Thank you. Just give us a minute while we go to set the room up and stop our recording. You can stretch your legs for a moment.